The ambience of the restaurant enveloped me like waves crashing against the shore. The clatter of silverware, the hushed tones of conversations, and the hissing of steam emanating from the kitchen created a symphony of sounds. I navigated between the tables with practiced grace, skillfully balancing 3 plates on my left arm while my right hand steadied a fourth. My feet throbbed in the unforgiving black heels, which felt like instruments of torture after 8 grueling hours of rushing back and forth across the polished marble floors. Table 7 needs more bread. Marco, the floor manager, barked as I walked past him. I nodded, suppressing the urge to remind him that I was already juggling for entrees that desperately needed to be delivered while they were still warm. But arguing with Marco was a losing battle. 6 months at Bellissimo had taught me that much. Right away, I murmured, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. The harsh reality was that I needed this job more than Marco needed me. The ever-growing stack of medical bills waiting in my apartment served as a constant reminder. My mother's cancer treatments weren't going to magically pay for themselves, and the insurance only covered a fraction of the costs. So I swallowed my pride, delivered the steaming plates to table 12, and promptly fetched more bread for table 7. The Friday night rush at Bellissimo was always a chaotic frenzy. It was a high-end Italian restaurant nestled in the heart of the city, catering to patrons who could effortlessly drop $300 on dinner without batting an eye. The clientele consisted of the wealthy, the powerful, and occasionally, according to hushed whispers among the staff, individuals whose fortunes were acquired through means best left unmentioned in polite company. Emma! Marco snapped his fingers at me. VIP table, corner booth, just arrived. I suppressed a groan. VIP tables meant demanding patrons with unreasonably high expectations. It also meant Marco breathing down my neck to ensure every single detail was flawless. But they also translated to better tips, and I was in dire need of every extra dollar I could possibly get. On it? I responded, straightening my crisp black button-down shirt and smoothing down the apron tied securely around my waist. I grabbed fresh water glasses and menus, taking a deep breath before heading to the corner booth, the most secluded spot in the restaurant. It was partially concealed behind a decorative stone partition and framed by lush, potted plants. The moment I approached the booth, I felt it, a palpable shift in the atmosphere, as if the very air had grown heavy and dense. 3 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits occupied one side of the booth. Their broad shoulders and watchful eyes immediately identified them as security personnel of some kind. But it was the woman seated alone on the other side who truly captured my attention. She was elegant, perhaps in her early 60s, with dark hair streaked with silver, swept up into a flawless updo. Her dress was simple yet undeniably expensive, a deep burgundy hue that perfectly complemented her olive skin. Diamond earrings caught the light as she turned her head, observing the restaurant with curious eyes. "Good evening," I said, placing the water glasses on the table. "Welcome to Bellissimo. My name is Emma, and I'll be—" The woman offered a polite smile, but gave no indication that she had heard me. One of the suited men leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Raichi doesn't hear," he explained, his voice carrying a subtle accent. "She reads lips, but only in Italian." "Oh!" I paused, momentarily flustered. Then, without conscious thought, my hands moved in front of me, fingers forming the signs that had become second nature after years of communicating with my younger cousin, who was born deaf. Hello, I'm Emma. I'll be your server tonight. Welcome to our restaurant. The transformation in the woman's face was instantaneous. Her eyes widened, sparkling with surprise and genuine delight. Her hands moved rapidly in response. You sign? How wonderful! No one ever signs to me here. My son usually has to translate everything. I smiled, the genuine warmth of human connection cutting through my exhaustion. I learned from my cousin. Not perfect, but I practice. Her hands flew gracefully. Your signing is beautiful. What do you recommend tonight? As I signed back, describing the evening specials, highlighting the handmade ravioli and the pan-seared sea bass, I became acutely aware of a prickling sensation along my spine, the unmistakable feeling of being watched intently. I glanced up, and my heart skipped a beat in my chest. A man had materialized behind the booth, tall and commanding. He was dressed in an immaculately tailored charcoal suit that did nothing to conceal the powerful physique underneath. He couldn't have been more than 35, with dark hair cropped short on the sides but longer on top, and a strong, clean-shaven jawline that looked as if it had been sculpted from marble. But it was his eyes that stole my breath. Dark as midnight, they were fixed on my hands with an intensity that made me falter mid-sign. There was something unreadable in his gaze, something that sent a ripple of unease through me. The suited men immediately shifted, creating space as the newcomer slid into the booth beside them. The woman, Ms. Ray-Chi, noticed my distraction and turned. Her face softened into a smile of recognition as she signed rapidly to him. *Luca, look, my waitress knows sign language. She's been telling me about the menu. The man, Luca, didn't take his eyes off me as he responded to his mother in flawless sign language, his large hands moving with surprising grace and fluidity. Is that so? The way he stared made me feel transparent, as if he could see every secret I'd ever kept. I shifted my weight, suddenly self-conscious of my worn black shoes, the faint coffee stain on my sleeve that I'd tried to scrub out that morning, the fact that I'd pulled my hair into a hasty bun because I hadn't had time to wash it. I didn't know many people in this city knew Italian Sign Language, he said aloud, his voice deep and smooth, with just a hint of an accent, like aged whiskey poured over ice. Where did you learn? American Sign Language, actually. I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted it. Something told me this wasn't a man accustomed to being corrected. My cousin is deaf. I learned growing up. Italian Sign Language is different, but there are enough similarities that we can understand each other. Ms. Ray-Chi signed something else to her son, too quickly for me to catch all of it, but I understood enough to know she was asking about me. Luca's response was measured, his dark eyes never leaving my face. She seems interesting. The woman's expression brightened, and she signed to me again. You must join us. Sit. Talk with me while we eat. It's so rare I find someone who can communicate with me directly. Mother, Luca said aloud, a note of warning in his voice, though his hands remained still. My cheeks flushed with heat. I'm sorry. I can't. I'm working. There are other tables. What's your name? Luca asked, cutting me off. Emma? I replied, the word barely audible over the sudden pounding of my heart. Emma Foster. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition. Impossible. Someone like him wouldn't know someone like me. Emma, he repeated, as if testing how my name felt on his tongue. Tell Marco you'll be exclusively attending to our table tonight. It wasn't a request. I don't think that's. It won't be a problem, he said with quiet certainty. As if on cue, Marco appeared at my elbow. His usually stern expression transformed into one of deferential respect, bordering on fear. Mr. Ritchie, he said, his voice pitched higher than normal. Is everything to your satisfaction? Ritchie. The name hit me like a physical blow. Everyone in the city knew that name even if they pretended not to. The Ritchie family owned half the waterfront district and had fingers in every major business in town. Their legitimate enterprises were impressive enough, but the whispered rumors about their other activities were what made people lower their voices when they spoke the name. And I'd just been correcting Luca Ritchie's Italian. Emma will be taking care of my mother tonight, Luca said to Marco. Exclusively. That won't be an issue, will it? Marco's eyes darted to me, then back to Luca. Of course not, Mr. Ritchie. Emma is one of our best. I'll reassign her other tables immediately. Before I could protest, Marco was gone, scurrying away like a startled mouse. Ms. Ray-Chi beamed at me and patted the empty space beside her invitingly. Her son watched, one eyebrow slightly raised, waiting to see what I would do. I hesitated, caught between professional boundaries and the impossible-to-refuse request from a man who clearly wasn't accustomed to hearing the word no. The momentary silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. I can sign for you while you work, I offered as a compromise, my hands moving in tandem with my words. I'll make sure everything is perfect for your dinner. Ms. Raichi looked disappointed, but nodded in understanding. Her son's expression remained unchanged, but something in his gaze intensified. Very conscientious, he remarked. I respect that. I took their drink orders. Sparkling water for Ms. Raichi and an expensive scotch neat for Luca. The other men didn't order anything. They weren't there to eat, I realized. They were there for protection. As I turned to leave, Luca's voice stopped me. How long have you worked here, Emma Foster? The way he said my full name sent a shiver down my spine. Not entirely unpleasant. 6 months, I answered, turning back to face him. And before that? I blinked, caught off guard by his interest in my employment history. The hospital. I was a nursing assistant. Something darkened in his expression. Why did you leave? Marco would have a fit if he saw me standing here being interrogated by a customer instead of rushing to get their drinks. But something told me Marco wouldn't say a word as long as Luca Ricci wanted to talk to me. Budget cuts? I said simply, not mentioning how the timing couldn't have been worse, coming just 2 weeks after my mother's diagnosis. Luca studied me for a moment longer, then nodded once, as if I'd confirmed something for him. The drinks, please. I escaped to the bar, my heart racing as if I'd just run a mile. Asterisk, what had just happened? Why would someone like Luca Ricci be interested in my work history? When I returned with their drinks, Ms. Raichi was animated, signing rapidly to her son. She stopped when she saw me, her face lighting up again. I set down her sparkling water, complete with a twist of lemon, just as she'd requested. Thank you, she signed. You're very kind. Do you work here every night? I placed Luca's scotch in front of him, acutely aware of his eyes tracking my every movement. Most nights, I signed back. Tuesday through Saturday. She nodded, then asked, Do you live nearby? Before I could answer, Luca interrupted, his hands moving swiftly. Mother, don't interrogate the girl. She's here to work, not share her personal information. But there was something in his expression, a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his jaw, that suggested his concern wasn't for my comfort, but for something else entirely. Ms. Raichi waved her son's comment away. I'm just being friendly, Luca. Don't be so suspicious of everyone. I pretended not to notice the tension between them as I described the specials again, this time for Luca's benefit. When I finished, Ms. Ricci ordered the sea base, while Luca chose the ossobuco without even glancing at the menu. As I collected the menus, my hand brushed against his. A jolt of electricity shot up my arm, and I jerked back instinctively, dropping one of the leather-bound menus onto the table. Luca didn't move, but his eyes narrowed slightly at my reaction. I'm sorry, I mumbled quickly, retrieving the fallen menu. Are you always this jumpy, Emma Foster? He asked, my name again rolling off his tongue like he was savoring it. Only when being interrogated about my employment history by strangers, I replied before I could stop myself. One of the suited men stiffened, but to my surprise, Luca's mouth curved into the ghost of a smile. There for an instant, then gone. Fair enough, he said. We're not strangers now, though, are we? As I walked away to place their order, I could feel his eyes following me, burning into my back like twin flames. I didn't know what Luca Ricci wanted from me, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. I had somehow caught the attention of the most dangerous man in the city, and I had no idea what that meant for me. I spent the next hour in a strange dance around the Ricci table, bringing appetizers, refilling drinks, and signing with Ms. Ricci whenever I could. She was charming and easy to talk to, asking about my family with genuine interest. I found myself sharing more than I intended about my mother's illness, my cousin Jason, who had taught me to sign, even the tiny apartment I shared with my roommate Liv on the east side of town. Each time I revealed something personal, I felt Luca's gaze intensify. He rarely joined our signed conversations, preferring instead to watch the exchange with those dark, penetrating eyes. When he did interject, it was usually to steer his mother away from asking questions that were too invasive. You shouldn't have to work so hard. Richie signed after I told her about my typical 70-hour work week split between Bellissimo and my weekend job at a local coffee shop. A pretty girl like you should be enjoying life. I smiled politely as I cleared away her empty plate. Bills don't pay themselves, I signed back. And my mother's medication is expensive. Luca's hand suddenly closed around my wrist as I reached for his plate. His grip wasn't painful, but it was firm enough that I couldn't pull away without making a scene. The restaurant sounds seemed to fade as blood rushed in my ears. "What kind of cancer?" he asked quietly. I blinked, startled that he'd been following our conversation so closely. "Pancreatic," I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. "Stage 3 when they found it." His thumb moved almost imperceptibly against my pulse point, which was now racing beneath his touch. "And the prognosis? They give her a year, maybe 18 months, with aggressive treatment." The words tasted bitter in my mouth. I'd spoken them so many times to so many doctors that they should have lost their power to hurt me, but they hadn't. Each time felt like the first, raw and devastating. Something flashed in Luca's eyes, not pity, which I had grown to hate, but something else, understanding perhaps. He released my wrist slowly, almost reluctantly. "I lost my father to cancer 3 years ago," he said, his voice so low that only I could hear. "Lung." It was quick. For a brief moment we weren't employer and waitress, or powerful mafia boss and nobody. We were just two people who understood what it meant to watch someone you love fade away day by day. The shared pain created an unexpected bridge between us, fragile but real. The moment shattered when one of the suited men leaned over and whispered something in Luca's ear. His expression hardened instantly, the vulnerability I'd glimpsed vanishing behind an impassive mask. "Bring the check," he instructed. "We'll be leaving shortly." I nodded and retreated to the computer terminal to print their bill. My wrist still tingled where his fingers had been, the phantom pressure a reminder of how easily he had reached out and claimed my attention, my space. When I returned with the leather folder containing their bill, Luca was signing rapidly to his mother, who looked disappointed. He stopped when he noticed me. "Mother isn't feeling well," he explained, though I hadn't asked. "We need to cut our evening short." Ms. Raichi sighed dramatically and signed to me. "I wanted dessert. The tiramisu here is excellent." I couldn't help but smile at her obvious ploy to stay longer. "Perhaps next time," I signed back. "I hope you feel better soon." "You were sweet," she replied, then added with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Luca, why don't you invite Emma too?" Luca cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Mother," he warned aloud. Ms. Ritchie rolled her eyes at her son's interruption. "He's always so serious." She signed to me with an exaggerated expression of exasperation. Ever since he took over after his father died. Luca placed several crisp $100 bills inside the check folder without even looking at the total. Far more than the cost of their meal. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with a fluid grace that spoke of wealth and power so ingrained they were second nature. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma Foster," he said, extending his hand. I hesitated before placing my much smaller hand in his. His skin was warm and smooth, apart from calluses I wouldn't have expected on a man who wore custom suits and drank 30-year-old scotch. "Thank you for taking such good care of my mother," he added, holding my hand a beat too long before releasing it. "She doesn't often get the chance to converse so freely." "It was my pleasure," I replied honestly. Despite the undercurrent of tension that had surrounded our interactions, I had genuinely enjoyed talking with Ms. Raichi. One of the suited men helped Ms. Raichi to her feet. She smiled warmly at me and signed. "I'll come back to see you soon, Emma. I look forward to it." I signed back. As they prepared to leave, Marco materialized beside me, practically vibrating with nervous energy. He bowed slightly to Luca. "Mr. Ritchie, it was an honor to have you dine with us tonight. Please know you're always welcome at Bellissimo." Luca barely acknowledged him with a nod before turning back to me. "Tuesday through Saturday, you said." My breath caught. He'd remembered my schedule. Yes, a single word delivered with such finality that it sounded like both a promise and a threat. I watched them leave, Luca and his mother flanked by the 3 security men, who scanned the restaurant with vigilant eyes as they moved toward the exit. Just before they disappeared through the door, Luca glanced back over his shoulder, his gaze finding mine unerringly across the crowded room. Something passed between us in that brief connection, something that made my skin flush hot then cold. Marco interrupted my thoughts with an incredulous whisper. "Do you have any idea who that was?" "Luca Ricci," I said, stating the obvious. "Not just Luca Ricci," Marco hissed, grabbing my elbow and pulling me away from the now empty booth. "That was the Luca Ricci, head of the Ricci family since his father died. He owns half this city, including this restaurant. People who cross him don't tend to stay in good health, if you understand what I'm saying." A chill ran down my spine. I'd known who the Riccis were in an abstract way. Everyone did. But having Marco lay it out so bluntly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "And he was watching you like you were his next meal," Marco added, his voice dropping even lower. "What the hell did you do to catch his attention?" "Nothing," I insisted, pulling my arm free from his grasp. "His mother is deaf. I know sign language. That's it." Marco looked skeptical. "Well, whatever it is, be careful. Men like Luca Ricci don't notice women like you unless they want something." His words stung, even though I knew they contained a harsh truth. What would someone like Luca Ricci want with someone like me? The rest of my shift passed in a blur. I couldn't stop replaying the evening in my mind, the intensity of Luca's gaze, the gentle pressure of his hand on my wrist, the fleeting moment of connection when we spoke of losing parents to cancer. Each memory sent a confusing mix of apprehension and something else, something I didn't want to examine too closely, coursing through me. By the time I left the restaurant at midnight, my feet were throbbing, and exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. The night air was crisp with early autumn, and I pulled my thin jacket tighter around me as I began the 15-minute walk to the bus stop. The street was quiet, most of the high-end shops and restaurants already closed for the night. My footsteps echoed on the pavement, punctuated by the distant sounds of traffic and the occasional burst of laughter from late-night revelers. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't notice the sleek black car idling at the curb until I was almost level with it. The passenger window slid down silently, revealing one of the suited men who had been at Luca's table earlier. "Miss Foster," he said, his voice neutral but authoritative. "Mr. Ricci would like to offer you a ride home." My heart leapt into my throat. I stopped walking, suddenly aware of how deserted the street was. "That's not necessary. I take the bus." The last bus left 10 minutes ago. I checked my watch, alarmed. He was right. I'd lost track of time during the closing duties and missed the last direct bus. Now I would have to take a much longer route with a transfer in a neighborhood I avoided after dark. "I'll manage," I said, taking a step back from the car. The rear passenger door opened, and Luca Ricci emerged, unfolding his tall frame with languid ease. He'd discarded his suit jacket, and the crisp white shirt with rolled-up sleeves revealed strong forearms dusted with dark hair. The streetlight cast half his face in shadow, giving him an almost predatory appearance. "It's late, Emma," he said, my name once again sounding like something intimate when he spoke it. "The bus you're waiting for isn't coming, and the alternative route passes through Westridge." The fact that he knew my transportation options sent a ripple of unease through me. "How did you?" "You told my mother you live on the east side. There's only one bus line that runs this late from here to there." He took a step toward me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle, with notes of cedar and amber. "Let me drive you home." It wasn't a request, despite the phrasing. "Where is your mother?" I asked, stalling for time while I tried to decide what to do. "I had my driver take her home first." His eyes never left mine. "She was quite taken with you, Mr. Ricci." "Luca," he corrected, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Luca," I amended, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't make a habit of getting into cars with men I barely know." "A wise policy," he agreed, surprising me. "But perhaps you could make an exception tonight. It's going to rain soon." As if on cue, I felt the first drop hit my cheek, followed quickly by another. I looked up at the sky, which had been clear when I'd left the restaurant but was now heavy with clouds. "How did you know it would rain?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. Luca's almost smile widened a fraction. "I checked the weather forecast." I felt foolish for immediately assuming something more sinister. Of course, he checked the weather forecast. It was the most normal thing he'd. The rain was really coming down now. Those cold drops were sneaking right down the back of my neck. My flimsy jacket wasn't doing much good, and pretty soon my hair was stuck to my head, and water was dripping off the end of my nose. "Emma," Luca said, and his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Please let me take you home. I promise I'll get you there safe and sound." A shiver went through me, and it had nothing to do with the rain this time. The smart thing would be to say no, to walk to the next bus stop and just take my chances with the longer route. But something in his eyes, a little spark of what looked like real concern, made me stop and think. "Why?" I finally asked, the raindrops catching on my eyelashes. "Why wait for me? Why offer me a ride? You don't even know me." Luca took a step closer, so close that I had to tilt my head back just to keep looking him in the eye. He lifted his hand slowly, making the move obvious, like he was giving me a chance to back away. When I didn't move, he gently brushed a wet strand of hair off my face, and his fingers left a trail of heat on my cold skin. "Let's just say I don't like the idea of you walking alone through Westridge at 1 a.m, he said, his voice low and serious. "Not when I've got a perfectly good car and driver right here." The logical part of my brain was screaming that getting into a car with a guy who was rumored to be the head of the city's most powerful crime family was way more dangerous than any neighborhood. But another part of me, a part one didn't really understand, wanted to say yes. A really strong gust of wind blew the rain sideways, soaking right through my jacket and shirt until they were stuck to my skin. I couldn't help but shiver. "Fine." I gave in, wrapping my arms around myself in a weak attempt to stay warm. "Thank you for the ride." The look of relief that flashed across Luca's face was so quick I almost thought I'd imagined it. He put his hand lightly on the small of my back, guiding me toward the open car door. The touch sent a wave of warmth through me, even through my wet clothes. The inside of the car was warm and smelled like expensive leather. I slid across the seat, really aware of the water dripping from my clothes onto what I was sure was some seriously pricey upholstery. Luca got in after me, closing the door. "And Dino will need your address," he said, nodding toward the driver, who was watching me without any expression in the rearview mirror. I hesitated for a second, then gave him my address, way too aware that I was telling a dangerous man exactly where I lived. And Dino nodded once and pulled away from the curb, smoothly joining the light late-night traffic. "You're cold," Luca said, reaching for something next to him. He pulled out a dark gray cashmere sweater and offered it to me without saying anything. "I'm fine," I lied, but my body betrayed me with another obvious shiver. Luca raised an eyebrow, not buying it for a second. "You're shaking, and your lips are turning blue. Take the sweater, Emma." I took it, but I didn't want to. I just wanted to feel the soft fabric on my skin. "I'll get it wet." "It'll dry," he said simply. I pulled the sweater over my head, and I was instantly wrapped in warmth and his scent. It was way too big on me, the sleeves hanging way past my fingertips, but the instant comfort was undeniable. "Better?" he asked, watching me with that intense stare that made me uncomfortable. I nodded, sinking back into the soft leather seat. The gentle movement of the car, the warmth, and the late hour started to make my eyelids heavy. I fought against getting sleepy, not wanting to let my guard down completely. "Why were you waiting for me?" I asked again because I needed to know the truth. This time, Luca looked at me for a long time, his expression impossible to read in the dim light of the car. Rain ran down the windows, making shifting patterns of shadows on his face. "You intrigue me," he finally said. Not many people would have the guts or the skill to talk to a stranger in sign language without even thinking about it. And even fewer would stand their ground when they're face to face with someone like me. "Someone like you?" I repeated softly. "Someone who makes you nervous," he clarified, his voice so low that Andino couldn't hear. Don't pretend I don't. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself when I'm near. But you don't run. You don't cower. Maybe I'm just good at hiding my fear, I suggested. The corner of his mouth turned up. No, you're remarkably easy to read, Emma Foster. Every thought and feeling crosses your face like words on a page. It's refreshing. His observation made my cheeks warm, even though I was still shivering a little. I turned to look out the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. We're almost to your building, Luca said. After a few minutes of silence, I straightened up, surprised to see the familiar street corners of my neighborhood. The ride had felt both really long and way too short. Andino pulled up to the curb outside my apartment building, a rundown 6-story walk-up with peeling paint and an elevator that was always broken. I felt a flash of embarrassment that Luca was seeing where I lived, so different from his world of luxury. Before I could reach for the door handle, Luca put his hand gently on my arm. Emma. I turned to look at him, suddenly aware of how close we were in the back seat. His eyes were darker than ever in the shadowy car, fixed on mine with a look that made me hold my breath. What? I whispered. I'll be seeing you again, he said. The words were somewhere between a promise and a warning. Is that a request, or a statement? I asked, finding a spark of courage I didn't know I had. Something like amusement flickered across Luca's face. Let's call it an inevitability. He reached past me to open my door, his arm brushing against mine. The brief contact sent a jolt of electricity through my skin. Rain blew into the car, but Luca didn't seem to notice or care. Keep the sweater, he said as I started to pull it off. You can give it back to me next time. Next time. The words hung in the air between us, full of meaning. Thank you for the ride, I managed, sliding across the seat toward the open door. Good night, Emma Foster, Luca said. My name sounded like something precious when he said it. I hurried through the rain to my building's entrance, fumbling with cold fingers to unlock the security door. Only when I was safely inside did I turn to look back at the car. It was still there at the curb, the engine running, the dark windows hiding the man inside, watching, waiting. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, each step a struggle as exhaustion pulled at my limbs. The car was still there when I glanced out the window in the hallway. Only after I'd gotten inside my apartment and locked the door behind me did I hear the engine rev and fade as the black car drove away. My roommate Liv was still up, curled up on our worn-out couch with her laptop and a mug of tea. She looked up when I came in, her eyes getting wide when she saw how wet I was and the expensive sweater I was wearing. That was definitely not mine. What happened to you? She asked, putting her laptop down. You look like you either had the best night ever, or the worst. I honestly don't know, I said, sinking into our ancient armchair. Too tired to even take off my wet shoes. Liv looked at me, getting more worried by the second. Emma, you're scaring me. What happened? I took a deep breath and told her everything. About Ms. Raichi and her son, the sign language, the missed bus, and the ride home. Liv's expression got more alarmed as I talked. Luca Raichi gave you a ride home? She interrupted, her voice getting higher. The Luca Raichi? As in, the guy who supposedly had 3 people disappear last year for skimming money from his casinos on the waterfront? Those are just rumors, I said weakly, even though I didn't really believe it myself. My cousin works for the DA's office, Emma, Liv countered. Trust me, they're not just rumors. They just can't prove anything because nobody will testify against him. She leaned forward, holding my hands tightly. Emma, you need to stay away from him. Guys like that are dangerous. They see something they want, they just take it. A shiver that had nothing to do with my wet clothes ran through me. You think he wants me? Why else would he wait outside your work and drive you home? Why else would he tell you he'll be seeing you again? Liv's eyes went to the sweater I was wearing. And why else would he give you his clothes? It's like he's marking his territory. That's ridiculous. I protested, but her words hit a nerve. There had been something possessive in the way Luca looked at me, something that was more than just normal interest. Promise me you'll be careful, Liv insisted. If he comes back to the restaurant, tell Marco you can't serve his table. I laughed without any humor. Marco practically worships the ground Luca walks on. There's no way he'd let me refuse to serve him. I ran my hand through my wet hair, wincing when my fingers got caught in the tangled strands. Besides, it was probably just a one-time thing. He was just being nice because I helped his mother. Liv didn't look convinced, but she dropped it and told me to take a hot shower before I caught pneumonia. I was grateful for the advice and stood under the hot water until I finally stopped shivering. Later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I found myself running my fingers over the soft cashmere of Luca's sweater, which I'd folded neatly on my nightstand. Even though I was exhausted, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Luca's intense stare. I felt the ghost of his hand on my wrist. I heard his voice saying my name like it belonged to him. "Next time," he'd said, like it was already decided. The most unsettling part wasn't that I was scared of seeing him again. It was that some small, reckless part of me was actually looking forward to it. 3 days went by without any sign of Luca Ricci. I worked my shifts at Bissimo, served rich customers who barely noticed I was there, and tried to tell myself that the strange encounter had been nothing more than a fluke. Maybe Luca had already forgotten about me and moved on to whatever other thing had caught his attention. That thought should have made me relieved, but instead, it left me with a weird empty feeling that I didn't want to think about too much. On Tuesday evening, I got to Bissimo for my shift and found Marco waiting for me, looking nervous and excited at the same time. "There you are," he said, looking at his watch pointedly, even though I was 5 minutes early. "I need to talk to you." He pulled me into the small office behind the host stand and closed the door so we could have some privacy. "Mr. Ricci called the restaurant this morning," he said without any warm-up. My heart skipped a beat. "Luca Ricci." Marco nodded, his eyes darting nervously to the door like he was afraid of being overheard. "He asked about your schedule this week. Wanted to know what evenings you'd be working." "And you told him?" I couldn't keep the accusatory tone out of my voice. Marco looked offended. "Of course I told him. This is Luca Ricci we're talking about. When he asks questions, you answer them." He straightened his tie nervously. "Anyway, he made a reservation for tonight, table 12 again, and he specifically asked for you to be his server." A confusing mix of fear and anticipation swirled in my stomach. "Just him?" "He didn't say," Marco replied. "But he reserved the table for two." "Two?" My first thought was Ms. Ricci, but something told me it wouldn't be her joining Luca tonight. "What time?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. 8 o'clock. Marco looked at me with sudden suspicion. "What's going on between you and Ricci? And don't tell me it's just because you can sign with his mother." He didn't ask for a table for his mother tonight. "Nothing's going on," I insisted, but the blush creeping up my neck probably told a different story. "I barely know him." Marco looked skeptical, but he was distracted by some customers coming in early for dinner. "Just be professional," he warned as he headed back to the host stand. "And for God's sake, don't do anything to upset him. The last thing we need is Luca Ricci's displeasure." The hours until 8 o'clock dragged by so slowly. I went through my duties like a robot, taking orders and bringing food while my mind was racing. Who would be joining Luca tonight? A business associate? A girlfriend? The thought gave me a pang that I tried to ignore. At 7:30, I went to the employee restroom to check my appearance. My reflection looked back at me from the streaky mirror, pale face, dark circles under my eyes from too many late nights worrying about hospital bills, hair pulled back in a plain bun. I pinched my cheeks to try to get some color in them, and then immediately felt stupid. What did it matter how I looked? This was just another customer, another table to serve. But the butterflies in my stomach told a different story. I went back to the dining room just as Luca arrived, right on time at 8 o'clock. He was wearing a dark blue suit that made his olive skin look really good under the warm restaurant lights, with the crisp white shirt open at the collar. Every head turned as he walked through the restaurant, an automatic response to the power he seemed to radiate. Marco was already all over him, leading him to the corner booth with way too much deference. Luca looked around the room as he walked, his eyes finding mine right away, even though the dining area was crowded. Something in his eyes made me catch my breath. A heat, a focus that hadn't been there before. I made myself finish refilling water glasses at my current table before I went to Luca's booth. Professional, Marco had said. I could be professional. By the time I got to table 12, Luca was sitting alone. A sleek leather briefcase was next to him. No one else had arrived. "Good evening, Mr. Reichi," I said, proud that my voice sounded normal. "Welcome back to Bissimo." "Emma," he replied, and my name sounded warm coming from him. "I thought we'd established that you would call me Luca." I felt my cheeks getting warm. "Luca," I corrected. "Will someone be joining you this evening?" His eyes never left mine. "Yes, you." I blinked, sure I'd heard him wrong. "I'm sorry." "Sit down, Emma," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. It wasn't a request. I looked around the restaurant, really aware of the other customers, and of Marco watching from across the room. "I'm working," I reminded him. "Not anymore. Not tonight." Luca raised his hand slightly, and Marco hurried over right away. "Is everything all right, Mr. Reichi?" he asked, avoiding my eyes. "Everything's fine," Luca replied smoothly. "I've arranged with your manager to have Emma's shift covered tonight. She'll be dining with me instead." Marco nodded like this was completely normal. "Of course. I'll have Tomas take over Emma's tables immediately." "Wait," I interrupted, finally finding my voice. "Don't I get a say in this?" Both men looked at me, surprised in different ways. Marco looked horrified that I would question the arrangement, while Luca seemed more curious than offended. "You need the money from tonight's shift," Luca said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "I'll make up for it. Triple what you would have made, including tips." Triple. The number echoed in my head. That would cover at least 2 of my mother's prescription refills. "Why?" I asked, ignoring Marco's increasingly panicked expression. "Why do you want to have dinner with me?" Luca's gaze didn't waver. "Because I find you interesting. Because I want to talk to you without being interrupted. Because I enjoy your company." He paused, then added more softly. "Because you're the first person in a long time who's looked at me and seen me, not just my name or my reputation." His honesty caught me off guard. I stood there, frozen, torn between staying safe and being curious, between common sense and the pull I felt toward this dangerous man. "Please," he added, the words sounding strange coming from him, like he didn't use it very often. "Have dinner with me, Emma." It was the please that got to me. One simple word that turned his order into a real request, hinting at a weakness under all that power. "All right." I gave in, sliding into the booth across from him. One dinner. The satisfaction that flashed across his face was almost predatory. Marco, looking relieved, hurried away to tell Tomas about the change. "Your sweater is at my apartment," I said once we were alone, filling the silence. "I forgot to bring it tonight. I wasn't expecting to see you." "Keep it," Luca replied casually. "It looks better on you anyway." The compliment made me feel warm. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble just to have dinner with me. You could have just asked." "Would you have said yes?" The question made me pause. Would I have? After Liv's warnings, after my own concerns about who and what Luca was. "I don't know," I answered honestly. He nodded, accepting my uncertainty without being offended. Then I saved us both the awkwardness of that situation. A waiter, not Tomas, but Antonio, the senior server who only took care of the most important guests, came to our table with an ice bucket holding a bottle of champagne that was already open. Without being asked, he poured 2 glasses, put a basket of fresh bread between us, and left quietly. "I didn't order this," I said, looking at the champagne suspiciously. "I did earlier today." Luca lifted his glass, waiting for me to do the same. To unexpected connections. I hesitated, then raised my own glass to meet his. "To honesty," I countered, looking right at him. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. He touched his glass to mine, making a delicate sound. To honesty. The champagne was unlike any I'd ever tasted, crisp and complex, with hints of apple and honey. I took a small sip, knowing I needed to stay sharp. "Tell me about your mother," Lucas said after a minute, surprising me by being so direct. "What do you want to know?" I asked carefully. "Everything." He leaned forward slightly. "Her name, what she was like before she got sick, what treatments she's getting, what hospital she's in." I narrowed my eyes. "Why?" "Because it matters to you," he replied simply. "And because I might be able to help." "I don't need charity," I said automatically, defending myself because of months of pitying looks and well-meaning, but useless, suggestions. Luca's expression got hard. "I'm not offering charity, Emma. I'm offering resources. There's a difference." I took another sip of champagne, thinking about what he said. "Her name is Catherine," I said. "She was a high school English teacher before she got sick. She loved her job, loved her students. She's always been the strongest person I know. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 3. She worked 2 jobs to put herself through college while taking care of me." The words came out easier than I thought they would, flowing out of me like water from a broken dam. I told him about the day we found out the diagnosis, how the doctor's words seemed to echo in the sterile room, how my mother had just nodded like she'd been expecting it all along, and how I'd been the one crying in the car afterward, while she comforted me. Luca listened with an intensity that I was starting to get used to, his eyes never leaving my face, his attention completely on me. He asked questions about the treatment, the oncologist, and the hospital where she was getting chemo. His questions showed a surprisingly deep understanding of cancer treatment. "Memorial West," I said when he asked about the hospital. "It's not the best, but it's what her insurance covers." Something flashed in Luca's eyes. Determination, maybe, or resolve. "Memorial West is okay," he said. "But the oncology department at St. Vincent's is one of the top 10 in the country. They're doing a clinical trial for an experimental treatment that's showing good results for pancreatic cancer." I stared at him, surprised by how much he knew. "How do you know that?" A shadow crossed his face. "After my father was diagnosed, I looked into every possible treatment. I wanted him to get the best care, no matter the cost." His jaw tightened. "In the end, it didn't matter. The cancer had spread too far by the time they found it." The pain in his voice touched me. Without thinking, I reached across the table and put my hand over his. "I'm sorry." He looked down at our hands, and something flickered across his face. Slowly, he turned his palm up, his fingers closing around mine. His hand was warm and strong, the touch unexpectedly gentle for a man who was supposed to be so dangerous. "I can make a call," he said, his voice low and serious. "Get your mother into the clinical trial at St. Vincent's. The success rates are encouraging, especially for cases like hers." I pulled my hand away, feeling a chill replace the warmth of his touch. "Why would you do that? You don't know us. You don't owe us anything." "Maybe I want to help because I can," he replied. "Because I have the ability to save your mother's life, and not using it would be wrong." I wanted to believe him, but in my experience, nothing came without a price, especially not from men like him. "And what would you want in return?" I asked. Luca's expression darkened. "Is that what you think of me? That I would use your mother's illness to get something from you?" The edge in his voice made me step back, but I held my ground. "I don't know what to think of you," I answered honestly. "I know your name. I know what people say about you. I know you're powerful enough to change my work schedule without asking and get me a table at a busy restaurant at the last minute. What I don't know is why you're interested in me, or what you want from all of this." For a long time, Luca didn't say anything, his dark eyes studying me in a way that made my skin crawl. Then he laughed. A short, real laugh that changed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger, almost approachable. "You really aren't afraid to speak your mind, are you?" he inquired, a note of wonder evident in his voice. "Not when it concerns my mother," I responded. "Or my integrity." Luca nodded, as if confirming something internally. "I respect that more than you know." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking onto mine. "I want nothing from you in return, Emma. Nothing you aren't willing to freely give." My offer comes with no strings attached. If after tonight you decide you never want to see me again, the offer still stands. Your mother's care will not be contingent on your relationship with me. The sincerity in his voice was truly compelling, but years of hardship and struggle had taught me to be wary of solutions that seemed too perfect, too easy. Why do you care so much? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. About me? About my mother? You barely even know us. Luca fell silent for a moment, his expression becoming pensive and thoughtful. When my father was on his deathbed, he said finally, breaking the silence. He made me promise to always remember that power without purpose is meaningless, that wealth without compassion is utterly worthless. His eyes met mine, dark and intense. I have both power and wealth, Emma, but opportunities to use them for something that truly matters are few and far between. His words resonated with an unexpected and undeniable truth. For all his intimidating presence and the whispered rumors of his criminal connections, there was something fundamentally honest about him in that moment. A fleeting glimpse of the real man beneath the carefully constructed reputation. I'll think about it, I said, unable to fully commit, but equally unable to completely dismiss his generous offer outright. I need to talk to my mother. It's her decision, not mine. He nodded, accepting my answer without pressing the issue any further. Just then, Antonio returned to take our dinner orders. Luca chose for both of us after confirming that I had no dietary restrictions, selecting dishes that weren't even listed on the regular menu. It should have bothered me, this casual assumption of control, but somehow it didn't. There was something almost protective in the way he took charge, relieving me of small decisions and easing the burden on my already overburdened shoulders. As we waited for our food to arrive, Luca began to ask about my life, my childhood, my education, and the dreams I held before they had been interrupted by my mother's illness. I found myself telling him things I rarely shared with anyone, pouring out details I usually kept locked away. About the scholarship I'd been forced to turn down when my mother became ill, about my half-finished nursing degree, and about the poetry I still wrote late at night when sleep eluded me. You should finish your degree, he said when I mentioned my interrupted education. The world has enough waitresses, but good nurses are invaluable. That's the plan, I replied. Once Mom is better and the medical bills are finally paid off, or, if she doesn't get better. The question hung in the air, gentle but direct, forcing me to confront a possibility I tried so desperately to avoid thinking about. I swallowed hard. Then I'll still finish eventually. It would be what she wanted. Luca reached across the table once more, his fingers brushing against mine in a touch that felt both deliberate and surprisingly casual. You're stronger than you realize, Emma Foster. The compliment warmed me more than it should have. Strong enough to have dinner with the most feared man in the city? I quipped, trying to lighten the suddenly heavy atmosphere that had settled between us. His mouth curved into that almost smile. Is that how you see me? As someone to be feared? Isn't that how you want to be seen? I countered, meeting his gaze directly. By most people, yes, he admitted readily, without hesitation. Fear is an effective deterrent against those who might otherwise consider crossing me. But not by you, he added, his voice softening considerably. Never by you. The intensity of his gaze made me look away, my heart hammering erratically against my ribs. There was something undeniably dangerous in his words. Not a threat, exactly, but a vulnerability that felt far more intimate and unsettling than any physical touch could ever be. Our food arrived, saving me from having to formulate a response. The dishes were exquisite. Tender lamb with rosemary and garlic, handmade pasta tossed with truffles and cream, vegetables so perfectly seasoned that they almost outshone the main courses. I immediately recognized that none of these items were actually on Bissimo's regular menu. They had been specially prepared for Luca. This is amazing, I said after the first bite, genuinely impressed. I've worked here for 6 months and I've never tasted anything like it. Chef Moroni worked for my family before opening this restaurant, Luca explained, watching me with evident pleasure as I savored the food. He still remembers all my favorites. Your family owns restaurants? I asked, surprised by this unexpected glimpse into his background. Luca nodded, cutting his lamb with precise movements. Among other businesses, my grandfather came to this country with nothing but his skills as a chef. He worked in kitchens for 15 years, saving every single penny until he could finally open his own place in Little Italy. His expression softened, tinged with something akin to nostalgia. It was tiny, just 6 tables, but it was always packed. People would wait for hours just for his carbonara. I tried to picture Luca's grandfather, a young immigrant full of dreams, hoping to build something lasting in a new and unfamiliar country. It was difficult to reconcile that image with the vast empire his family now controlled. From restaurant owner to whatever it is your family does now, I said carefully. That's quite a transition. A flicker of amusement danced in Luca's eyes. My grandfather understood that survival requires adaptation. The restaurant was just the beginning. It gave him connections, respect within the community, a foothold. He took a slow sip of his wine. The rest evolved naturally. The deliberate vagueness was certainly not lost on me. Neither was the implication that his family's rise to power hadn't been entirely legitimate. And now, I asked, what does the Ricci family business entail these days? Real estate primarily, he replied smoothly. Construction, import, export, hospitality. All perfectly legal and above board. The last part was delivered with a slight quirk of his lips, suggesting that he knew I wouldn't entirely believe him. And the other things? I pressed, surprising myself with my own boldness. The things people whisper about. Luca set down his fork, his expression turning serious. Do you really want to know, Emma? Because once I tell you, there's no going back. Sometimes ignorance truly is bliss. A shiver ran through me at the sheer gravity in his voice. He was offering me a choice, to remain safely within the territory of plausible deniability, or to step across a line into knowledge that might very well change everything. I want the truth, I said, my voice sounding steadier than I actually felt. Whatever that is. He studied me for a long moment, as if carefully weighing my readiness for whatever he was about to share. Then he nodded once, decisively. My family protects people, he said simply. We provide security and resolution when traditional channels fail. Yes, sometimes that involves methods that exist in the gray areas of the law. But we have a code. We don't harm innocents. We don't deal in drugs, and we don't exploit women or children. You make it sound almost noble, I observed, not entirely sure if I believed him. There's nothing noble about violence, he countered, surprising me with his candor. But there is honor in protecting those who cannot protect themselves, in ensuring justice when the system fails. His eyes locked on mine, dark and intense. The world isn't black and white, Emma. Most of us live in the gray. There was an undeniable truth in his words, a truth I'd encountered during my all-too-brief time working in the hospital. I'd seen abuse victims return to their abusers because restraining orders were utterly ineffective at keeping them safe. I'd watched elderly patients get swindled out of their life savings with absolutely no recourse. I'd witnessed the system fail those it was meant to protect, time and time again. Why are you telling me this? I asked softly. Because you asked, he replied simply. And because if we are to... He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. If we are to know each other, I want it to be with clear eyes. No illusions, know each other. The phrase hung suspended between us, heavy with unspoken possibility. I'm just a waitress with a half-finished nursing degree and more responsibility than I know how to handle, I said, needing to be equally honest. I'm not sure what someone like you sees in someone like me. Luca reached across the table, his fingers tracing a gentle pattern on the back of my hand. I see someone who carries the weight of the world without complaint, who works 2 jobs and still finds the energy to sign with a stranger's deaf mother, who looks me directly in the eye and demands the truth when most would settle for comfortable lies. His voice dropped lower, becoming even more intense. I see a woman whose strength and compassion perfectly match her beauty, and I find myself utterly captivated. Heat bloomed in my cheeks, spreading quickly down my neck and across my chest. No one had ever spoken to me like that before, with such focused intensity and such completely unguarded admiration. "I'm not sure what to say to that," I admitted, feeling flustered. His mouth curved into that ghost of a smile. "You don't need to say anything." The rest of dinner passed in a haze of rich food, effortless conversation, and lingering glances that made my skin tingle with heightened awareness. Luca asked about my poetry, seeming genuinely interested when I reluctantly shared that I wrote mostly about resilience and finding beauty even in struggle. He told me more about his mother, how she'd gradually lost her hearing after an illness in her 30s, and how she'd refused to let it diminish her in any way, insisting on learning sign language and then teaching the entire family. "She liked you," he said as we shared a tiramisu that was unlike any dessert I'd ever tasted. "She doesn't warm up to many people." "I liked her too," I replied honestly. "Will she come back to the restaurant? Would you like her to?" I nodded. "She reminds me a bit of my mom." That same stubborn strength. Something softened in Luca's expression. "I'll bring her next week. She'd enjoy that." By the time we finished eating, the restaurant had emptied of other patrons, although the staff remained, pretending to be busy while clearly waiting for Luca to leave. I glanced at my watch, startled to see that it was nearly midnight. "I should get home," I said reluctantly. "I have an early shift at the coffee shop tomorrow." Luca nodded, signaling to Antonio for the check, which he paid without even glancing at the total. As we stood to leave, he placed his hand lightly on the small of my back, gently guiding me toward the exit. The touch was both gentle and possessive, drawing curious glances from the remaining staff. Outside, the same sleek black car from the other night was waiting at the curb, with Andino standing beside the passenger door. The night air was cool, autumn asserting itself more firmly now, and I shivered slightly in my thin server's uniform. "May I drive you home?" Luca asked, his tone making it clear that he would accept my refusal if I gave it. This time I didn't hesitate. "Yes, thank you." The ride to my apartment was both similar to and entirely different from the previous one. Similar in the luxurious comfort of the vehicle and Andino's quiet competence behind the wheel, but different in the charged atmosphere that now crackled between Luca and me, a heightened awareness that had grown throughout our dinner conversation. When we arrived at my building, Luca surprised me by getting out of the car with me. "I'll walk you to your door," he said, his tone brooking no argument. I should have protested. This was how he would learn exactly where I lived and which apartment was mine. But the truth was, I wanted those few extra minutes with him, those few additional steps in his company. "Fourth floor," I warned as we entered the shabby lobby. "The elevator's been broken for months." "I don't mind stairs," Luca replied simply. He followed me up the narrow stairwell, his mere presence filling the confined space. I was acutely aware of him behind me. His steady breathing, the subtle scent of his cologne, and the careful placement of his feet on the worn steps. At my door, I turned to face him, suddenly feeling nervous. "Thank you for dinner," I said, the words woefully inadequate for the evening we'd shared, "and for the conversation." "Thank you for your company," he replied softly, "and your honesty." We stood there for a moment, the air between us heavy with unspoken possibilities. Luca was close enough that I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw and could count his impossibly dark eyelashes if I tried. My heart hammered in my chest, loud enough that I was certain he must be able to hear it. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up to gently tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. "May I see you again, Emma?" he asked, his voice lower than before. I knew what the sensible answer would be. This man was dangerous, not just because of who he was and what he did, but because of how he made me feel. Like I was worth noticing, worth knowing, worth pursuing. "Yes," I whispered, the word escaping before I could reconsider. The smile that transformed his face was unlike any expression I'd seen from him before. Open, genuine, almost boyish in its pleasure. It made him look younger, more approachable, and infinitely more dangerous to my already fragile peace of mind. "Tomorrow night," he suggested. "I'll pick you up at 7. "I have to work until 9, I reminded him. Then I'll pick you up at 9:15, he amended smoothly. Wear something comfortable. Nothing fancy. I raised an eyebrow. Are you going to tell me where we're going? No. The glint in his eye was almost playful. Let me surprise you. Before I could respond, he leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. When I remained still, he pressed his lips gently to my cheek, the contact brief but electrifying. Good night, Emma Foster, he murmured against my skin, his breath warm and intoxicating. Then he was gone, descending the stairs with quiet confidence, leaving me standing outside my apartment door with my cheek tingling and my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. Inside, Liv was waiting up for me again, her expression shifting quickly from concern to alarm when she saw my face. Oh no, she said, sitting up straight on the couch. I know that look. What happened? I sank heavily into the armchair, emotionally and physically exhausted, but strangely exhilarated. I had dinner with Luca Ricci. You what? Liv's voice rose to a near shriek. After everything I told you about him? He arranged it with Marco, I explained weakly. He had my shift covered and everything. Of course he did, Liv muttered, running a frustrated hand through her already disheveled hair. Men like him are used to getting exactly what they want. She fixed me with a stern look. Please tell me you turned him down. I couldn't quite meet her eyes. He offered to help my mom get into a clinical trial at St. Vincent's, one that's showing incredibly promising results for pancreatic cancer. Liv's expression softened slightly at the mention of my mother, but her underlying concern remained evident. And what does he want in return? Nothing, I said. That's what he claims, anyway. Men like Luca Ricci don't do something for nothing, Liv insisted, shaking her head. There's always a price. I thought about the way Luca had looked at me across the dinner table, the intense gaze in his dark eyes when he called me captivating. Maybe the price isn't what you think. Liv studied my face intently, her expression growing even more alarmed by the second. Oh God, you like him. You actually like him. I don't know him well enough to like him, I protested, though the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. You know enough to be afraid of him, Liv countered, her voice sharp. He's a criminal, Emma. Maybe not convicted, but everyone knows what the Ricci family does. She leaned forward, gripping my hands tightly. Whatever he's offering, the clinical trial, the fancy dinner, the rides home, it's not worth getting mixed up in his world. Part of me knew that she was right, the sensible, cautious part of me that had kept me going through all the hardships of the past year. But another part, a part that was growing stronger with each encounter, was undeniably drawn to Luca in a way that I couldn't quite explain or deny. I'm seeing him again tomorrow night, I admitted quietly. Liv closed her eyes, her expression pained. Emma. Just one more time, I said, though I didn't entirely believe it myself. To discuss the specific details about the clinical trial for Mom, right? Liv replied, her tone making it clear that she didn't believe me either. Just be careful, okay? Don't forget who he is, what he is. I won't, I promised. But as I lay in bed that night, replaying every single moment of the evening, the way Luca had listened so intently to everything I said, the gentle touch of his hand on mine, the soft press of his lips against my cheek, I wondered if I was already in too deep to heed Liv's dire warning. The next evening at work, I was completely distracted, dropping a tray of drinks and mixing up orders in a way that was completely unlike me. Marco noticed, pulling me aside after I delivered breadsticks to a table that had ordered garlic knots. What's wrong with you tonight? He demanded. You're a total mess. Sorry? I mumbled, rubbing my temples where a tension headache was beginning to form. I just didn't sleep well. Marco's expression softened slightly. Look, I know this situation with Ricci is unusual to say the least, but try to focus, okay? At least until your shift ends. I nodded, forcing myself to concentrate for the remaining 2 hours. When 9 o'clock finally arrived, I changed out of my server's uniform in the employee restroom, swapping it for the simple jeans and sweater I'd brought with me. Luca had said comfortable, nothing fancy. Still, I found myself wishing I had nicer clothes. Something that didn't scream, perpetually broke Waitress. At precisely 9:15, I stepped outside to find the black car waiting at the curb. This time, Luca himself got out to greet me, dressed more casually than I'd ever seen him before, in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that looked sinfully soft. The less formal attire did absolutely nothing to diminish his commanding presence. If anything, it only enhanced it, making him seem more accessible yet no less powerful. "Right on time," I commented as he opened the passenger door for me. "I value punctuality," he replied with that ghost of a smile. "And I was really looking forward to seeing you." The simple admission warmed me from the inside out. I slid into the car, breathing in the now familiar scent of leather and Luca's subtle cologne. He joined me in the back seat, signaling to Andino with a nod. "You still haven't told me where we're going," I pointed out as the car pulled away from the curb. "Patience," Luca replied, a hint of amusement lacing his voice. "We'll be there in about 20 minutes. He asked about my day, seeming genuinely interested in the mundane details of my coffee shop morning shift and the dinner service at Bissimo. I found myself gradually relaxing, the tension of the workday slowly melting away as I described a particularly difficult customer who had sent back his steak 3 times. "I hope you charged him for all 3 steaks," Luca remarked, his tone suggesting that it wasn't entirely a joke. I laughed. "I don't think Marco would dare." "He would if I suggested it," Luca said, the casual reminder of his immense influence making me momentarily uneasy. He must have noticed the change in my expression, because he reached over to take my hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I'm sorry. That sounded more threatening than I intended." The apology surprised me. "It's okay," I said, not pulling my hand away. "It's just strange for me, being with someone who has so much power, and who's so used to getting his way." Luca's thumb traced a soothing pattern on my palm, sending unexpected tingles up my arm. "I don't ever want you to be uncomfortable with me, Emma. Ever." He paused, his expression turning serious. "If I overstep, tell me. I might not always realize when I'm being too much." The vulnerability in his honest admission touched me deeply. This man, who commanded fear and respect from everyone around him, was actually asking me to check him, to tell him when he went too far. It was both endearing and slightly terrifying. "I will," I promised. We drove through the city center and then east, away from the waterfront district where the Ricci family held the most influence. I watched with growing curiosity as we entered a quieter residential neighborhood filled with tree-lined streets and older homes set back from the road. The car finally stopped in front of a modest, 2-story house with warm yellow light spilling from the windows. It was nothing like what I would have expected Luca to own. No sprawling mansion, no obvious security, just a well-maintained home that could easily belong to any middle-class family. "What is this place?" I asked as Andino opened the door for us. "You'll see," Luca replied, placing his hand on the small of my back as he guided me up the walkway. Instead of using a key, he simply knocked on the front door. After a brief moment, it opened to reveal a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back into a simple bun. Ms. Ricci's face lit up with a smile when she saw us. "You came," she signed enthusiastically, her gaze moving from her son to me with evident delight. "And you brought Emma." "Hello, Ms. Ricci." I signed back, genuinely pleased to see her again. "It's good to see you. Please call me Sophia," she insisted, ushering us inside. Come in, come in. Everything is almost ready." The interior of the house was warm and inviting, filled with comfortable furniture, framed family photographs, and the tantalizing aroma of Italian cooking wafting from the kitchen. It was nothing like the cold, sterile luxury I'd imagined surrounding Luca in his daily life. Sophia led us through a living room filled with books and cozy throws to a dining room, where a table was already set for 3. A middle-aged woman in a simple uniform was putting the finishing touches on what appeared to be a feast. "My mother insisted on cooking for you herself," Luca explained quietly, his hand still resting protectively at the small of my back. "She doesn't get many opportunities to share her cooking with new people." I turned to him, surprised. "This is your mother's house?" He nodded. She prefers to live separately. She says having her own space keeps her independent. Sophia reappeared from the kitchen, carrying a steaming dish of what looked like homemade lasagna. She set it on the table with a flourish, then signed rapidly to me. "Luca tells me you're taking care of your own mother," she said, her expression sympathetic. "That you had to leave school to help her." I shot Luca a surprised glance. He must have told his mother all about our conversation. "Yes," I signed back. "She has cancer." Sophia's face softened. "That's very difficult. You're a good daughter." She gestured to the table. "Please sit. Food helps everything." I couldn't help but smile at her motherly certainty. As we took our seats, I noticed the way Luca watched his mother with quiet affection, a softness in his expression that I hadn't seen before. Here, in this warm, normal-looking home, he seemed different. Still powerful, still commanding, but somehow undeniably more human. The meal was simply incredible. Homemade lasagna, crafted with layers of the most delicate pasta imaginable, and a rich, savory meat sauce that tantalized the taste buds. Crusty bread, still radiating warmth from the oven, accompanied a vibrant salad, dressed with a simple yet elegant blend of olive oil and balsamic vinegar. Sophia insisted on serving me herself, generously piling my plate high with food while signing, her hands moving with practiced grace, that I was far too thin. I needed to eat more, she emphasized. Throughout the entire meal, she peppered me with questions about me, my childhood, my interests, and my dreams for the future. There was something so naturally maternal in her curiosity, so very different from what I might have expected from the mother of a man like Luca Ricci. She seemed genuinely interested in me as a person, not just as some random woman her son had brought home for dinner. "You will finish your nursing degree," she signed at one point, her expression brooking absolutely no argument. "It's important to complete what you start," she insisted. "Mother," Luca chided her gently, both speaking the words and signing them simultaneously. "Emma has responsibilities that make that difficult right now." "Nonsense," Sophia replied dismissively, waving her hand as if dismissing a bothersome fly. "Where there's a will, there's a way," she declared firmly. "We can help." That casual "we," the effortless inclusion of me into their family circle, left me momentarily speechless. I glanced at Luca, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Help? How?" I finally signed to Sophia, my fingers fumbling slightly in my surprise. She simply waved her hand again as if the details were utterly inconsequential. "Scholarships, schedule arrangements, whatever you need," she signed quickly. "Luca handles these things," she added with a knowing glance at her son. I felt a flicker of unease, a subtle tremor of apprehension. Was this what Liv had warned me about? The gradual enmeshment in Luca's world? The slow accumulation of debts I could never possibly repay? "Emma can make her own decisions about her education," Luca said, surprising me with his unexpected restraint. "We're here to offer support, not to dictate her choices," he stated firmly. Sophia rolled her eyes dramatically at her son, but to my surprise, she didn't argue. Instead, she launched into a series of stories about Luca as a child. How serious he had been, how fiercely protective of his younger sister, Bianca, how he had taught himself sign language at the tender age of 8 years old when Sophia first began losing her hearing. He would practice for hours, she signed, her expression softening with fond remembrance. "Such a stubborn boy," she recalled affectionately. "Wouldn't stop until he got each sign absolutely perfect." I watched Luca's face intently as his mother spoke of him. There was a hint of embarrassment there, but also a clear undercurrent of deep affection. This was a side of him I never would have imagined in a million years. The devoted son who learned an entire language for his mother. The serious child who grew into a man carrying the immense weight of his family's legacy. After dinner, Sophia insisted that I help her in the kitchen while Luca took an urgent business call. As we cleared the dishes together, she studied me with keen, observant eyes. "You're good for him," she signed unexpectedly, her hands moving with swift precision. "He smiles more with you." I nearly dropped the plate I was holding, the porcelain slipping precariously in my grasp. We barely know each other. I signed back, my movements clumsy with surprise. Sophia shook her head dismissively. Sometimes, quickly, she signed, her gaze unwavering. I knew with Luca's father the first night we met. Her expression grew more serious, her eyes clouding with a hint of sadness. My son has a difficult life, she signed slowly and deliberately. Much responsibility, she emphasized. Not many people see past that to the man underneath. I thought about Luca's words in the restaurant, replaying them in my mind. About how I looked at him and saw him, not just his fearsome reputation. He's not what I expected, I admitted, signing the words carefully. Sophia smiled knowingly, a hint of amusement dancing in her eyes. Good, she signed, nodding her head. Expectations are boring, she declared. Reality is much more interesting. She reached out and touched my arm gently, her touch surprisingly comforting. Just promise me you will not judge him only for what others say, she urged. See for yourself, she implored. Make your own decision. It was sound advice, surprisingly free of the subtle manipulation I might have expected from someone so invested in her son's interests. Before I could respond, Luca appeared in the doorway, his phone call finished. Are you interrogating Emma? He signed to his mother, his expression amused. Just getting to know her, Sophia replied innocently, batting her eyelashes playfully. Go take her to the garden, she urged. It's a beautiful night. Luca offered me his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it, allowing him to lead me through the French doors into a small but meticulously maintained garden. Strings of fairy lights twinkled, illuminating a winding stone path that snaked through carefully pruned shrubs and late-blooming flowers. A weathered stone bench sat invitingly beneath a trellis completely covered in climbing roses, their intoxicating scent sweet in the cool night air. Your mother is amazing, I said as we sat on the bench, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched. This isn't at all what I expected. What did you expect? Luca asked, his voice laced with genuine curiosity. I shrugged, feeling a sudden wave of embarrassment wash over me. I don't know, I stammered. Something more intimidating, maybe? Bodyguards, a massive mansion with security gates. Luca smiled slightly, a hint of amusement playing on his lips. I have that too, he admitted with a hint of wryness. But my mother prefers this normalcy, he said, using air quotes. She has security, discreet but always present, he assured me. But this neighborhood, this house, it's important to her. Keeps her connected to a simpler life. And you? I asked, tilting my head slightly. Where do you live? Waterfront district, he replied without hesitation. Top floor of the Riviera building. The Riviera. It was the most exclusive residential tower in the entire city. Its penthouse apartments were rumored to cost more than most people earned in an entire decade. Of course, that's where he lived. Do you ever want something simpler? The question slipped out before I could fully consider it, the words hanging in the air between us. Luca was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkened garden. Sometimes, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But simplicity isn't a luxury I can afford, he admitted. Not with my responsibilities. The weight in his voice touched something deep inside me, a chord of understanding that resonated within my soul. For all his immense power and wealth, Luca Ricci lived within the rigid constraints of his own making. Different from mine, but no less real. Your mother mentioned your sister, I said, quickly changing the subject to steer away from the uncomfortable intensity that threatened to engulf us. Bianca. A shadow flickered across his face, momentarily darkening his features. She lives in Europe now, he explained. Milan. It's safer for her there. The implication was clear, hanging unspoken in the air between us. Safer from the countless enemies his family had undoubtedly made over the years. Safer from the inherent dangers that came with bearing the infamous Ricci name. You miss her, I observed softly, my voice barely audible. Luca's hand found mine in the dim light, his long fingers intertwining with my own. Yes, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Very much. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the night air cool and crisp around us, the warmth of his hand a solid anchor in the surreal landscape. It felt utterly bizarre to be here in this peaceful, secluded garden, holding hands with a man whose very name inspired fear and dread throughout the entire city. "I spoke to Dr. Rossi at St. Vincent's this morning," Luca said eventually, his voice carefully measured. "About the clinical trial." My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden surge of hope and anxiety constricting my chest. "And?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "There's a spot available," he said, turning to face me, his expression earnest. "Dr. Rossi is one of the leading oncologists in the country, specializing in pancreatic cancer. He's willing to review your mother's case immediately. If she's a suitable candidate and based on what you've told me, I believe she will be. Treatment could begin as early as next week." I simply stared at him, utterly speechless, scarcely able to believe what I was hearing. How did you arrange this so quickly?" I stammered, the words failing me. "The Ritchie family has donated substantially to St. Vincent's Oncology Department over the years," he explained matter-of-factly. "After my father's diagnosis, I established a foundation in his name to fund research. Dr. Rossi owes me nothing, but he respects what we've done for the hospital." "And the cost?" I asked, the practical question impossible to ignore. These trials can be incredibly expensive, even with insurance. "The trial itself is covered entirely by research grants," Luca replied without hesitation. "Any additional expenses will be handled by my father's foundation. Your mother won't see a single bill. It was simply too much to process, too much to take in all at once. This incredible gift, a potential lifeline that could save my mother's life, offered so casually, so matter-of-factly. Hope, that dangerous emotion I had been deliberately suppressing for months, surged powerfully within me, threatening to overwhelm me. I don't know what to say," I whispered, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. Luca squeezed my hand gently, his touch reassuring. "Say you'll bring your mother to meet Dr. Rossi on Friday," he suggested softly. "Say you'll give this a chance." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me since his initial offer. "The truth, Luca," I pleaded. His dark eyes were solemn in the dim light, the intensity of his gaze unwavering. "Because I couldn't save my father," he admitted, his voice low and raw. "But maybe I can help save your mother. Because you deserve something good after everything you've sacrificed." His voice dropped even lower, becoming more intense and intimate. "And yes," he confessed, "because I'm drawn to you in a way I can't fully explain. And I want to see you smile without the constant shadow of worry that's been in your eyes since the moment we met." The sheer honesty of his answer completely undid me. A single tear slipped down my cheek, followed by another, and then another. Without any hesitation, Luca reached up to gently brush them away, his touch impossibly gentle for hands rumored to have ordered countless acts of violence. "I'm afraid," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "Not of you," I clarified quickly, "but of what this means, of owing you something I can never possibly repay." "You owe me absolutely nothing," he insisted, his voice firm. "This is freely given, Emma. No strings attached, no expectations whatsoever." "There are always strings," I argued softly, shaking my head. "Maybe not ones you're consciously attaching, but they exist nonetheless. That's just how the world works." Luca considered this for a moment, his expression thoughtful and introspective. "Then let me be perfectly clear about what I want," he said finally, his gaze meeting mine with unwavering intensity. "I want to see you again," he declared. "Not out of any sense of obligation, but because you choose to. I want the chance to get to know you better, to see if this undeniable connection between us is as real and as significant as I believe it to be." His thumb gently traced the delicate curve of my cheek, sending shivers down my spine. "But even if you walk away from me right now, the offer for your mother still stands," he stated firmly. "That is completely non-negotiable." I searched his face intently, looking for any flicker of manipulation or deception, any hidden agenda lurking beneath the surface. Instead, I found only sincerity and something else, a surprising vulnerability that seemed completely at odds with everything I had ever heard about Luca Ritchie. "I want to see you again, too," I confessed, the truth spilling from me before I could even reconsider the consequences. even though it probably makes me completely crazy. The genuine smile that transformed his face was breathtaking, open and unguarded, and startlingly young. Without any warning whatsoever, he leaned forward, his intentions perfectly clear. I had every possible opportunity to pull away, to stop what was about to happen. But I didn't. His lips met mine with a gentle pressure, a tentative exploration rather than a demanding conquest. The kiss was hesitant at first, a question posed rather than a statement declared. When I responded, leaning instinctively into him, his hand came up to cradle my face, deepening the kiss with a thoroughness that left me breathless and wanting more. He tasted of fine wine and forbidden possibility, dangerous and sweet all at once. When we finally pulled apart, I could feel my heart racing uncontrollably, my skin flushed despite the cool night air. Luca's eyes were darker than ever, intense and focused entirely on me. I've wanted to do that since the very first night in the restaurant, he admitted, his voice rough with barely suppressed desire. When you started signing with my mother and didn't even flinch when I appeared. I laughed softly, the sound slightly shaky and breathless. I definitely flinched, I assured him. I was terrified. His thumb traced my lower lip, sending a fresh wave of shivers coursing through me. Terrified, maybe, he conceded. But you didn't look away, he observed. You didn't back down. He smiled slightly, a hint of genuine amusement in his eyes. It was refreshing, he admitted. A sharp tap on the window abruptly interrupted our intimate moment. We turned to see Sophia standing at the French doors, her expression knowing and mischievous as she signed through the glass. "Stop kissing in my garden and come in for dessert," she demanded playfully. I felt my cheeks flame with embarrassment, a hot blush rising from my neck. But Luca just laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that made him seem years younger and infinitely more approachable. "We've been summoned," he said, standing and offering me his hand. "And trust me, you absolutely do not want to miss my mother's tiramisu," he insisted with a playful grin. "It's legendary." I placed my hand in his, allowing him to gently pull me to my feet. As we walked back toward the warm, inviting light of the house, I was acutely aware of the critical crossroads at which I now stood. To my left lay the sensible path, maintaining a safe distance from Luca and his complex, dangerous world, gratefully accepting his generous help for my mother, but nothing more. To my right lay something entirely unknown, potentially perilous, but also vibrant with an intoxicating sense of possibility. The choice should have been utterly obvious, but as Luca's hand tightened reassuringly around mine, as Sophia smiled warmly at us from the doorway, I found myself stepping deliberately, irrevocably, toward the alluring unknown. 6 months later. "You sure about this?" Liv asked, helping me pack the last of my clothes into a well-worn suitcase. "It's not too late to change your mind, you know?" she reminded me gently. I carefully folded a soft cashmere sweater, Luca's cashmere sweater that had somehow become permanently mine, and placed it on top of the neatly folded pile. "I'm sure," I said firmly, knowing that so much had irrevocably changed in just half a year. My mother, after 3 grueling months in Dr. Rossi's clinical trial, had shown truly dramatic improvement. The tumors had shrunk by over 60%, a medical miracle, and her energy had returned in small but significant increments, until she was finally strong enough to resume teaching part-time. She was currently in Florida, thoroughly enjoying a much-deserved 2-week cruise with her sister, a joyous celebration of life that I could never have even imagined 6 months ago. And then, of course, there was Luca. Our relationship had developed slowly, deliberately, neither of us rushing the delicate and precious thing that was gradually growing between us. He had been incredibly patient, always respectful of my boundaries, never pushing me for more than I was truly ready to give. We'd spent countless evenings at Sophia's house, at quiet, intimate restaurants where we could talk for hours, at my mother's cozy apartment playing cards and laughing as she steadily regained her strength. I'd seen so many unexpected sides of him that I never could have anticipated. His dry, self-deprecating sense of humor, his fierce, unwavering loyalty to those he genuinely cared about, his unexpected and surprising gentleness. I'd also glimpsed the harder, more dangerous edges of his world. The sudden, urgent phone calls that would pull him away at odd hours, the subtle but ever-present security that always surrounded us like an invisible shield, the deferential way people treated him, a deference that often bordered on thinly veiled fear. Living with him is a big step, Liv persisted, her voice laced with unconcealed concern. Especially in that building, with those people. Those people are his family, I reminded her gently, and they've become incredibly important to me, too. It was the absolute truth. Sophia had become a second mother to me, patiently teaching me how to cook authentic Italian dishes and improving my sign language skills immeasurably. Even some of Luca's close associates, the ones who operated within the confines of legitimate businesses, had welcomed me with surprising warmth and genuine affection. I just worry, Liv admitted, her expression softening slightly, about what happens if things don't work out. About what happens if they do. I countered with a wry smile. I fully understood her concern. Moving into Luca's opulent penthouse apartment was far more than just a simple change of address. It was a highly visible alignment with him, a significant step into his complicated world that couldn't easily be undone. I know who he is, I said, zipping the suitcase closed with a decisive whoosh. What he is, I emphasized. I've made my peace with it. That wasn't entirely true, of course. There were certain aspects of Luca's intricate business dealings that I deliberately chose not to examine too closely. Invisible lines I wasn't entirely sure I could ever bring myself to cross. But we had established certain clear boundaries early on in our relationship. He never discussed certain sensitive matters with me, and I, in turn, never asked. It was an imperfect solution, I knew, but it allowed us to build something real and meaningful amidst the ever-present complications. And school? Liv asked, abruptly changing tactics. You're still going back in the fall, right? I nodded my head. Absolutely. Already enrolled, I assured her. Luca's helping me work out the schedule so I can still continue working part-time at the hospital. I smiled slightly, a hint of amusement playing on my lips. Turns out, dating the owner of half the city has some definite advantages. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Liv gave me a pointed look that was equal parts resignation and affection. That's him. I guess probably, she sighed dramatically. I checked my watch. Precisely 7 p.m., exactly when Luca had said he would arrive. His unwavering punctuality was something I could quite literally set my watch by. I opened the apartment door to find him standing in the hallway, impeccably dressed, as always, in a perfectly tailored suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and commanding presence. His dark eyes softened instantly as they met mine, the guarded expression he usually wore for the world immediately melting away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated affection. Ready? He asked simply, his voice low and resonant. I nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of this significant transition pressing down on me. This small, slightly shabby apartment, for all its imperfections, had been my home for the past 3 years. Leaving it felt incredibly momentous, like closing a chapter of my life. Luca sensed my hesitation, stepping forward to gently take my hand in his. We can wait, he said quietly, his gaze searching mine. If you need more time, there's no rush. His willingness to accommodate my uncertainty, to respect my feelings, only strengthened my resolve. No, I'm ready, I said firmly, just saying goodbye. He nodded, understanding without needing any further explanation. After I hugged Liv tightly, who gave Luca a pointed look that clearly communicated, "Take care of her or else." He picked up my suitcase with effortless ease. "I'll bring the car around while you take one last look," he offered, giving me the privacy he somehow instinctively knew I needed. When he was gone, Liv shook her head in disbelief. "I still can't believe Luca Ricci is being all considerate and patient," she marveled. "It's like finding out a shark enjoys classical music." I laughed, the sound light and genuine. "He's so much more than his reputation, Liv," I insisted. "I wouldn't be doing this if he wasn't." She sighed, then pulled me into another fierce, bone-crushing hug. "I know," she whispered. "Just be careful, okay? And remember, if you ever need to come back, for any reason at all, this is still your home, too." "I know," I whispered back, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you." Downstairs, Luca was waiting beside the sleek black car, and Dino standing at a respectful distance. As I approached, Luca's expression grew instantly concerned. "You're crying," he observed, reaching out to gently brush away a tear I hadn't even realized had fallen. Having second thoughts? I shook my head, leaning into his comforting touch. "No, just acknowledging the change," I explained. "It's a big step." "It is," he agreed, his gaze holding mine with unwavering intensity, "but one I'm truly honored you're willing to take with me." The sincerity in his voice warmed me from the inside out, chasing away the lingering shadows of doubt and apprehension. This was what Liv and so many others simply couldn't see. The real man beneath the fearsome reputation. The vulnerable soul hidden beneath the carefully constructed armor of power. "Take me home," I said, the word feeling both foreign and completely right on my tongue. Luca smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, lighting up his eyes and erasing years from his countenance. "With pleasure," he replied softly. As we drove toward the glittering waterfront district, toward the luxurious high-rise that would now be my home, I thought back to that fateful night 6 months ago, when Luca had first driven me home in this very same car. I had been cold, wet, afraid, and completely uncertain of him and, frankly, of myself. Now, his hand rested comfortably in mine, his very presence a source of reassurance rather than a threat. The city lights sparkled against the darkening sky, a familiar landscape seen from a completely new perspective. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges I couldn't yet even imagine, a complicated relationship that would undoubtedly be tested by the harsh realities of Luca's world and my rapidly evolving place within it. But as Luca's thumb traced gentle patterns against my palm, as the distance to our destination grew shorter with each passing minute, I found myself looking forward rather than back, filled with a sense of hopeful anticipation. Whatever came next, whatever the inevitable complications, whatever the unexpected joys, we would face it together, side by side. The car turned smoothly onto the waterfront boulevard, the Riviera building rising majestically before us like a glittering beacon against the night sky. "Home," I thought again, testing the word carefully in my mind, letting it settle and take root. "Second thoughts?" Luca asked quietly, his perceptive dark eyes watching me intently. I shook my head, squeezing his hand reassuringly. "No, just thinking about how sometimes the most unexpected paths can lead you exactly where you're meant to be." His smile was soft, intimate, meant only for me. My mother would say, "That's not just coincidence, that's fate." "And what do you say?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. Luca gently brought my hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss against my knuckles with a tenderness that still surprised me, even after all these months. "I say I'm grateful," he whispered, "whatever you call it. Grateful that you spoke to my mother that night," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Grateful that you gave me a chance despite everything you'd heard about me." His voice dropped even lower, becoming more intense and intimate. "Grateful that you saw me, really saw me, when most people only see what they fear." As the car pulled smoothly up to the grand entrance of the building, as the doorman hurried forward to greet us by name, I leaned across the small space between us and kissed Luca softly on the lips. "I'm grateful, too," I whispered against his skin, "for everything." And I truly was grateful. Grateful for the completely unexpected turn my life had taken the night I simply signed with a deaf woman in an upscale restaurant. Grateful for the complex and compelling man who had noticed me and been intrigued, and grateful even for all the inevitable complications and inherent contradictions that came with loving someone like Luca Ricci. As we stepped out of the car together, as Luca's hand found its familiar and reassuring place at the small of my back, I knew with sudden, unwavering clarity that this was where I belonged. Not because fate had decreed it, or because circumstances had forced it upon me, but because I had chosen it, eyes wide open and heart willing, whatever came next, we would face it together, hand in hand.